tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are running for this position.
Well, my name's Joe, and I'm running. Well, I own a bunch of real estate.
Okay.
I'm a landlord.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a family guy. I got a wife, a couple kids.
Yeah.
Reason I'm running is because I've noticed that it seems like things aren't getting valued properly.
Uh-huh.
So the fact of the matter is there's just some problems there.
Right.
So I've done a lot of appeals on my own properties and everything else, and come to find out that a lot of things aren't correct. So
okay.
I'm just saying, okay, well, it's not right, so I figured I'd run, try and be somebody instead of complaining about it, try and do something about it.
Find a solution.
Right.
Yes, I love it.
And the primary thing that I'm seeing is that if you go to like 2 million plus homes getting sold, a lot of them are getting way undervalued.
Oh, okay.
And then if you go to, say, $500,000 homes and below, a lot of them are getting overvalued.
Oh, okay.
So what happens is you have a whole, like, the council and the executive of the county decide how much taxes, property tax everybody's going to pay.
Right.
So if the top end pays less, the bottom end's got to pay more.
Okay.
If they're valued too low.
Right.
So it's a problem. It's happening. It is happening.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this also affects like rentals and stuff like that too. So if you have cheaper rentals, if they're getting taxed more, then that does end up going to renters too. So it is kind of a big issue. I know a lot of people don't know who the assessor is, but it is a big issue. It affects people's cost of living.
Right.
And especially now when we're in a situation where especially middle and low income people are having a hard time affording just basic stuff, I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Yeah. And when I've talked to like the assessor's office, they don't seem to even want to acknowledge this as a problem, and certainly not working on fixing it.
Okay. So to help us understand what the assessor's office does, like what would that role even encompass for you?
So basically what the assessor's office does is it puts a value on everybody's property. So whether it be 500,000, 10 million, whatever the property is, they put a value on it.
Okay.
And based on your value is how much of the chunk of property taxes you would pay.
Okay.
So if you had a $2 million home, that should pay 4 times as much as a $500,000 home, if it's valued correctly in the assessor's office.
Right.
What I'm saying is it seems pretty clear to me that it's not being done correctly. It's being too low on the high end and too high on the low end, which is whether you're high income or low income, I don't think anybody would say, somebody that can barely make it by should be paying more than their fair share.
Right. That's totally fair. So, do you live and work in Snohomish County, or like what is your sort of like background in Snohomish County?
Yeah, so I've lived in Snohomish County for, many, many years now. I live in Bothell right now.
Okay.
I own a home there. I own a bunch of rental property in Snohomish County. And that's where I live. I own property. I'm a housing provider. I see firsthand when I go to somebody renting, say, a house I own, and say, hey, they raised my property taxes by $200 a month. Yeah. So I have to raise rent, or eventually it just doesn't work for me, and then I either have to sell that property or I'm subsidizing that property.
Okay. Yeah. So this is something that, obviously affects community members in general, but also many business owners as well, probably in a lot of different ways, whether they're leasing their space or they're also a landlord in some.
Absolutely. They also have to be, businesses also are valued, every business building. Yeah. So say if you have like an office complex and it's not valued correctly, then the improper tax would be paid there, and then office space would be potentially raised their office space rent in order to do it. Another thing that I actually recently in a debate that I was with Linda, I heard that as far as businesses are concerned, she mentioned the idea she might be proposing trying to put for residential owner-occupied homes, like a $300,000, the first $300,000 doesn't pay school taxes. Oh. Her idea was to push that more on businesses, which I think that maybe should be looked at more carefully, because I feel like businesses have gone, had a lot of problems over the last couple of years. COVID wasn't good for businesses. Yes. I think something like that should be, really looked at very carefully before something like that would be implemented.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like your sort of business background actually lends a lot of really great sort of insight into like the office of the assessors.
Right. I mean, it's also one of those things like, so the current assessors worked in the assessor's office for many, 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 many years. Yeah. She worked there and then she became the assessor or whatever. And so she has a lot of experience in the assessor's office, but not actually any real life real estate experience. which I have 20 plus years.
Right.
So, my entire livelihood is dependent on me, buying and selling and valuing things correctly in order to get, have a career.
Right. And be able to pay the bills. So how would you balance sort of your professional career along with the assessor's office if you were elected?
It's fine. I got time. I run several real estate companies right now.
Okay.
And, the leader's supposed to decide on things and get people to do it. They're not necessarily supposed to, obviously, in big tasks, you can't just do the whole thing yourself.
Right. Exactly.
So it's more about delegating and make sure things are working correctly. Like one of the big things that I think is happening right now is in the mass appraisal system, they're not adjusting the parameters well. So it's trying to take too short of a time period.
Okay.
And it's also just trying to average things out.
Okay.
More than, so the higher end and the lower end the lower end's getting brought too high and the higher end's getting brought too low.
Yeah.
So things like that really have to be adjusted.
So, and I don't know nearly enough about this as you're speaking.
Yeah.
Like, man, I need to educate myself. But what I'm thinking is, like, oftentimes when we're trying to figure out how to make something work or do a calculation, we opt for technology or things like that to make algorithms. Do you think that there's maybe an algorithm at play here that's not working correctly? Or, like, what would be your sort of way to address that sort of unfair sort of...
Well, as we all know, you use a computer.
Right.
And what are you doing half your time? You're trying to get the computer to work properly. Right? Because often it doesn't. So I think one of the big things, you have to check it all the time. Have the human check to make sure it's working properly. Instead of just having it spit out numbers and making that.
And trusting that those
and then
numbers.
trusting the thing.
That looks good, yeah.
And then once that happens, you got to look into the system and say, okay, well, why is it doing that? What do we need to adjust? And are there some that we have to work on more individually than others?
Right.
And I think that's one of the big things that are happening is anytime you have a system, it's going to veer one way or another. So first of all, I think you need to take the system, and there's a lot of adjustments. Like you need to take, in law, it says take 5 years of comparables. So say, per se, in 2022, you went 20% up and then 20% down in 6 months.
Right.
So where do you take that comparables? So anytime you're taking a data system, if you take a longer period of time and take more points over a long period of time, you can definitely get a much more accurate prediction.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big things they're doing right now, they're trying to take too short of periods in order to figure out what the next year, that
the math is not mathing in that one. It sounds like, so my background is in social work, and a lot of what I do with research is the data statistically significant? What can we pull from this that actually means like true stuff? And it sounds like maybe that needs a bit of an adjustment.
Right, because you also have situations like, say, okay, you have an area that's primed for house flipping. Everybody's heard of house flipping, right? And so maybe if you have a mass appraisal system, maybe that's just calculating how many people house flipped in that area opposed to actual values. So you got to be careful when you have two houses exactly the same, say 1970s vintage, and one of them somebody puts hundreds of thousands of dollars into and makes it super fancy and sells it for a lot. You got to be careful that does not become comparable for the 1970s house that has not been. Because also you have this issue within the 1970s house where somebody hasn't fixed it up, they cannot afford to pay double the property taxes because this house sold for a lot more and was fixed up.
Yeah, okay. And do you have any insight into, like, maybe what has happened in the past in the assessor's office that has led to that specifically? Like any, I don't know, I'm thinking like system specific. Like is there?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously over the last 20 years, technology has, infiltrated our lives a lot.
Right. Yes.
Right. And so I think one of the big difference is they're trying to rely more and more on technology. And, it used to be 30 years ago, everybody would just, there'd just be appraisals, they'd assess all by hand. And so I think, especially when you have like the current assessor that's been there through this technology thing, is really trying to rely on that technology too much instead of checking it to make sure it's correct.
Okay.
And I think that's what's happening. It's been clear to me, I mean, not to give the current assessor, she's a nice lady. I don't want to give her a hard time. I don't think she has any will.
Right.
But since the current assessor has been a thing, I know my property taxes have doubled. Yeah. And it just seems like it used to be always a conservative view of the value of the property.
Right.
Now it's way overvalued, especially on the low stuff. And the high stuff, it just has not done a good job of keeping up, because
Okay.
you can look at actual sales
Right.
and the valuation date, and you can pick up, like I could
Yeah.
even hand you a sheet here,
Yeah.
and you could see if you take just a small sample of,
Yeah.
you know, I just picked the closest. If you look at high end,
Mm-hmm.
they're all undertaxed by a lot of percentage.
Oh yeah.
Only 1 out of the 6
Mm-hmm.
was undertaxed. But then if you go to 500,000 below,
Wow.
only 1 out of the 6.
Yeah. Right. That's wild.
Yeah, so these is all being overtaxed. These are all being undertaxed.
Mhm.
So what happens is then the really expensive homes taxes then have to get paid by the low end.
Yeah.
But
And that's
that's-
a hard sell for
that's
sure.
that's a tough deal.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So one thing, kind of that we have, some community members have expressed, is that we are seeing obviously a lot of younger adults who are not able to afford like rent or buying their own home, so they're staying, you know, with their parents or multi-generational sort of living, or older adults who are trying to age independently. And families are like, I don't want to send them to assisted living. I don't want them to live on their own property, you know, 10 minutes away from me. I want them to be on my property. And so increasing like ADUs or, you know, additional dwellings like on a property, and then that, you know, kind of plays into rezoning and things like that. Does the assessor's office have involvement with rezoning? And
So the assessor's office is not going to have a lot of involvement with rezoning. Their primary thing is to say how much is the property valued and what's
Okay.
the fair tax amount of that property.
okay.
You know, the assessor also doesn't have a lot of control over other things. Like I certainly could complain about other things.
Yeah.
Like, give you a specific example.
Yes.
Like, so we're taxing ourselves since 2019 and now we're taxing ourselves by 50% more,
Wow.
right? And our schools are taxed per student. You know, they get funding per student. We have 4% less students in schools since 2019.
Wow.
This is primarily because Zoom school doesn't work well for
Right.
12 and under.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I'm homeschooling my kid and they're
Right.
stuck with that, or they're going to private schools. And so basically we're defunding our schools, which is the primary portion. It's like 80% of the property tax burden, but we have 50% more taxes.
Wow.
Like I'll give you another one. Like, so I have a neighbor, 2 of them, you know, fairly similar houses. One house was fixed up, super nice. He's put, you know, probably $250,000 landscaping in there. But then next door is the teacher, right?
Yeah.
And so his school's getting defunded this year.
Right.
And so he's having to bring, you know, he's buying school supplies and stuff like that because
Yeah.
his school's getting defunded this year.
Yeah.
But his property taxes are higher than his fancy house next door.
Oh wow.
Right.
Oh my
so
gosh.
so it's just like you run into these weird things right now.
Yeah.
So certainly right now is not a time to be overtaxing yourselves
Right.
and, you know, to have people not be able to afford their own homes.
For
Because
sure.
we just don't need it. I mean, if we have 4% less students, why are we trying
Right.
to tax ourselves out of our homes?
Yeah. So how, and I mean, maybe I'm naive, that very well could be, but I almost feel like there's a lot of people who probably don't understand the depth of the assessor's role and kind of what is actually happening. How would you sort of educate the community on things like this? Like how what would be your intention on transparent sort of communication and education?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a tough one. It's like you can put it on the website, but people aren't like, oh, I'm going to go look at the property taxes.
Right.
So,
And like if I do, what does this even mean? You
right.
know?
So that's why I think it's so important that the assessor's offer has to be correct. Because we have a situation where factually we're overtaxing low and middle income housing.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Right.
And so secondly, we have to do that right. And then secondly, there are subsidy programs like
Right.
for disabled and elderly.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's where you got to really push focus.
Yeah.
So you don't want grandma and grandpa getting pushed out of their home, or
Yeah.
in my case, parents or whatever.
Right.
Because so you really have to do a lot of outreach to those folks. I mean, you might even have to go to their homes and help them fill out their paperwork.
Right.
Because too often you run into situations like that, and those type of programs, it goes to the people that know how to
Right.
fill out the paperwork,
Yeah.
opposed to the people you should. And remember,
Right.
every subsidy you provide, then everybody else has to take the tax
Yeah.
burden that they're not doing.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. Once again, no ill will against the current
Right,
assessor,
yes.
but she does have 20 acres that she's getting a tax subsidy on as a timber management thing.
Okay.
And it's obviously not because she needs the tax break, because she
Right.
knows how to fill out the paperwork.
Right.
So then that tax burden is going to go on to the rest of everybody else.
I see.
So you do have to make sure you're really doing outreach for the people that really, really, really need it.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be phone calls. I think there needs to be letters.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly the government's going to have data of who these people are. So huge outreach. I mean, on the website, the first thing you should see is a big button for, you know, how to get these things, and then have people follow up. And if somebody calls the office, set them with an advocate, have them follow up with them, make sure they are getting the tax break they get. So somebody, you know, especially when you have people like, I'm trying to take care of my home, my parents, you know, you don't want it to be part of like they can't afford to live there.
Yeah, you make a really good point, because there, I think in many things in life and government and everything, we have programs to address a need, but oftentimes if the ways to address it is too complex, you're not reaching the people who are falling through the cracks. And those are the ones that really, really need that help. Are there people in the assessor's office now who do things like outreach or meeting community members where they're at?
I feel like right now they'll answer the phones and they answer questions, but I don't feel like they typically go to the extent of like taking that person's name down, following up with them, making sure they follow through, and making sure that person, because we're talking about often seniors and disabled folks. I mean, when you're dealing with that, they're not people that are necessarily going to hop in the car and be like, oh, I'm getting down there and I'm going to figure this out, or they can't.
Right.
So
or
I don't,
they don't even know that is something.
They don't even know. Right.
Yeah.
So I think there has to be a lot of outreach to figure out who those people are and get them the tax breaks that they need, so they're not getting kicked out of their home. Because what happens when people are retiring now with all these expensive homes and property taxes going up, everybody's worried about losing their home because too many property taxes.
Right. Yeah. And then we already have so many people on the streets, so many people struggling as it is. It's really like a prevention method for, you know, preventing homelessness.
Absolutely. And you know, me as a landlord, I'm a housing provider. Right. So what happens to me if my cost is $1,000 and rent is $1,000, my costs go up by $200, I either got to sell the place, lose money, and then eventually that just doesn't work.
Right.
So you've got to be very careful to make sure that the people that can afford it do pay. Like we don't want to be undervaluing $2 million plus homes, so everybody has to pay more taxes.
Right. And I think, you know, landlords tend to get like sort of not as much support, like, oh, you're just making money off of your property and things like that. But yeah, it is a business too, and it's a livelihood, and there are a lot of people who are doing it for the right reasons. And then it sounds like you have a lot of intention behind sort of your goals here, is that like things are happening and it's going to make it hard for us to keep housing folks if
absolutely. I mean, as a landlord, especially now, so since we have been, you know, having crime issues around the state, you know, it has pushed a lot of people from the major city, Seattle, north. Right. These people are primarily going north, so there's not actually enough housing up here for the people that want housing here anymore. Yeah. And you know, where do people start? They start in rentals, whether it be a house or apartment or anything else. And so I'm finding now, you know, when I go to the thing and say, hey, look, I have some basic housing here. Right. You know, this is affordable stuff. And even when I've been bringing appraisals, like actual appraisals to the Snohomish County Assessor's office now, they're telling me, well, that's not necessarily a good way to value a property. And I'm like, well, what is that? Right. Yeah, and then I'm bringing actual sales, and they're saying, well, we need to adjust those. And it's like, well, this just isn't accurate. Right. Like, I would never do this, and I'm finding a big resistance saying, look, this is not, you can't be doing this because it's just not right. Overtaxing rentals is not going to help the people living in rentals either. Right. Because there's a lot of tax breaks for, you know, you get tax breaks for homeowners, you get tax breaks for, you know, businesses, you get tax breaks for elderly, you get just tax breaks. But what about the kid that just got out of college and has a $100,000 student loan, is only making $30,000 a year? Right. Yeah. My goodness. Yeah. Yeah. It's yes. As someone who has a lot of student loans. Yeah. Yes. But I think we see a lot of that too here, just with that, like I mentioned, multi-generational living of folks that are like, we built an ADU over the garage because, like, I can't. What am I going to do? I'm not making much as it is, and have to pay back my student loans and all of that. So that's a super fair point. I think it speaks to a lot of people who are. Absolutely, and I think that's why the government, especially in the property tax authority, really has to be part of working towards affordability instead of just saying they are. They have to actually do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can talk until we're blue in the face, but it's it's the actions that matter.
Yeah, and once again, it's, whether you're high income or you don't make as much money, nobody's going to say, oh, I think the person making $30,000 a year should be paying more.
Right.
It's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, you buy a $2 million plus house, you understand you're going to have to pay a lot for it.
Right.
And you can afford it.
Yes, yeah, totally. What are your sort of like, I always talk about, not being the smartest person in the room, and when you're leading sort of like larger organizations, you need that team of people and expertise. What kinds of like expertise are you, planning to utilize, or how will you sort of make these changes?
It's always just finding people that are good at what they do.
Right.
I mean, I'm always an advocate of having a smaller group that gets paid more, so that you can get better qualified people, and more motivated people. So what motivates people more than anything else is getting ways that they can,
live.
save a little money, so they can live and whatnot.
Take care of themselves.
Right. So there's also things even, there isn't a shortage of probably appraisers now. So you can even do, in that office, you could do internships and things like that, and bring people up through the assessor's office in order to get them to accurately do things. And then also maybe work on the tech guys so they more understand valuing property opposed to just tech. Because, you got to be careful to say reality versus just tech.
Right.
So,
and it's a big deal. It's a big impact, like life-altering impact that this technology is having, and having that background knowledge is important.
Right, and I own quite a bit of real estate. I deal and I manage with things, and obviously I'm in the real world where things have to be run well.
Right.
Or what happens? You go broke, and then
you lose your business, or you lose your home.
You lose your business, or you lose your home, and I think too often we're ignoring the fact that people do have to make a living.
That our decisions are truly impacting every person in our community in some way or another.
Right, and whereas I understand property taxes are an exciting subject, it does affect everyone. Right. And also, especially people that are trying to, low and middle income folks, or even businesses are just trying to get by.
Right. Totally. You're blowing my mind right now. What are some other things kind of that you like to sort of talk about when you're doing campaigning and things like that, and talking about, why people should vote for you? What are some of your like kind of key priorities or key components of sort of your spiel that you tend to give?
So another thing I would touch on is just, any government agency, I mean, it's been especially frustrating over the past couple of years. We're not in office. There's nobody to talk to. There's nobody to hear from. You can email us and we won't reply.
Right.
So in government, I think too often they forget you need to be accessible.
Right.
You got to be super, super, super accessible. And once again, so what happens if you think your value is wrong? You got to go and appeal it. And that's its whole long process in itself.
Right.
And often, many years, even if you win the appeal, then it won't adjust the following year, even though they tend to just do mass appraisal and go up by percentages. So they're also not being very good about then adjusting it the following year after doing that.
Okay.
Also, when someone's contacting the assessor's office, I would want to assign a advocate to that person too, so they can both help explain the process, and also if someone's appealing, like they're like, I don't know how to appeal this, I don't know what to do, so have them be an advocate sort of on that side. So like, if you go into court, you wouldn't only have one side have a lawyer, you'd have both sides, so both sides can get represented, and then that can help them through the process, show them how to fill out the paperwork and those kind of things. So my big thing would be a lot more accessible, make sure people feel like they're being heard, and just helping them out, understand the process, because too often you get in there, you get in the government, well here's 50 pieces of paper, and then you get at the front of the DMV line, you're like, that's wrong, back to the line. You're like, you're like, but I gotta get to work.
It is that sort of vicious cycle of, if you don't know what you don't know, then you're gonna fall through the cracks.
So accessibility, have an advocate, and get them through the process. I mean, government's supposed to be helpful, not impossible.
Right. That should be your slogan. Is that your slogan? It should be.
I don't know.
I like it.
This is the first time I run for anything. I never thought I'd be running for any office.
Right. Yeah, isn't that wild? I think that tends to be, I feel like, a lot of people is like, yeah, I just saw a problem and I couldn't come up with any other solution other than just let me have my, attempt at it or whatnot.
Right.
And that background knowledge of actual experience in the field, doing the things, seeing it, being impacted by it,
Right.
I think is huge and something that's very relatable to the community.
And I think that's really the thing. I think government was designed to have professionals in that area govern it.
Right.
I don't think it was designed to have somebody in government to stay in government, to govern more.
Yeah.
It really,
Right.
because it doesn't give a deep understanding of the issues.
Yeah.
And honestly, if people understood this and all this kind of stuff, I think they would be a little bit more frustrated than they currently are.
Yes, I would say so. I think we hear a lot about like, oh, my property taxes, but it almost feels like people don't know that there is an option to appeal, or that they can speak up and say, but I don't agree with this. This doesn't feel right.
Right.
And definitely folks who are, purchasing or renting, homes of lower value tend to be people who, are maybe working more hours or different jobs, or maybe they don't have the capacity, right, to even know where to go or have those supports.
Yes. I mean, obviously, I don't have the numbers, but I would be willing to bet that the very lowest, most inexpensive homes have a 10th of the appeal rate of the most expensive homes.
Right.
I can tell you that almost for
Yes.
sure.
I
So,
think that seems reasonable.
the job of assessor is particularly important on the less expensive homes to
Yeah.
get their tax correct.
Yeah, and I don't think I ever realized too how important this is in sort of addressing social issues.
Yeah.
As a social worker, I'm always working with people who are, struggling with housing challenges or different, aging, behavioral health, whatever. And not once have I considered, what is your property tax value? Or have you, what happened recently? Or how is this impacting you? Or that, one of my aspects of our code of ethics is advocacy. And if you don't know that you need to be advocating for something, then you're in a way doing your client disservice. So I feel very appreciative that I have this information now too, and that people can listen to this and hear, that it is a problem. You identify that, and you want to come up with solutions too.
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad to see these days that, we have a lot of issues. Like, I have renters, primarily like older folks that, they've lived there for a very long time.
Right.
And then there are programs like Housing Authority and things like that, and they might not even know. So I'm pushing them to get on it, and then there's, they have to do the paperwork, and it's complicated, and then there's often a wait list, or they can't get on it, and then it's just like, well, clearly this lady that's been living here for 30 years, what do I do?
Right.
When I've got, my cost is $1,200 and their rent is $800.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
A lot of times I'm subsidizing many people right now for that exact reason, because I'm not going to kick the old lady out of her house because she just doesn't know how to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah. Totally. Huh, man, this is very fascinating stuff and very, very important. Anything else that you can think of? Yeah, I want to make sure that people understand these very important pieces.
I think that's a big thing. It's just we really got to make sure that somebody that's got huge multi-million mansion pays their fair share. Pays as much as they should be, because otherwise everybody else will pay more.
Yeah.
We really just can't. Especially with all the affordability issues nowadays, we really can't. Any amount.
Right.
50, 100, 150 is just a lot of money for somebody that doesn't make a lot.
Yeah.
It's it's a big deal, and I get it. People don't realize it, and you try your best, but so I'm just trying to give a choice.
Yeah, it sounds like you are sort of here to sort of have people's back and be an advocate.
Yeah.
In a place where I would say that a lot of people probably don't feel like they have a voice. So admirable.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So I would try and get the records correct. I'd try to get the valuation correct, which would help. And then also, if you're in a government position, I would hope that there would be times I can, yell at the city council and the executives and say, look, these are the problems that renters and homeowners and stuff like that are having, and we need to fix it. We can't just have people that know how to fill out paperwork, which primarily tend to be higher income folks, getting subsidies.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of sort of help for people who have more money or have more privilege, and less around folks who have less, which, as you mentioned, is just it's not the right way.
Right. I mean, the reality is not everybody looks like me. Not everybody has the advantages I have, and that's just reality. Right. I've got a lot of apartments and everything else. I'm hiring an accountant, and I have people and all this kind of stuff. And so I have advantages that other people don't have. So if we're not looking out for those people, then they get screwed. Right. Time and time again. Yeah. And we got to fix that. We got to be focusing. The people in charge have to be focusing on that.
Yeah, and the whole community, and everyone, because the smallest voices matter just as much as the biggest voices.
Right, and that's the thing is, as a landlord, I see this all the time, the government trying to come up with this program or that program, and saying, oh, this homeless and all that kind of stuff, but I actually see, the situation.
This is like the step-by-step process.
Right.
This is going wrong.
Right, and everybody's trying to figure out with housing and everything else, and the government's like, oh, we need to get in this business and create more housing, but, I mean, the reality of the situation, the government doesn't run housing well. Right. When they say we're building affordable housing, that means they're paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month to house somebody. Right. Whereas I can house somebody for a lot less. Right. What really needs to be doing is expanding programs like Housing Authority and so much. Yeah. So then you have private landlords who run things well. Right. Then subsidizing the tenant that's in there through government funding in order to keep them in their homes. Yeah. Because also, an old lady that's been living in the same place for 30 years, she doesn't want to move to some other place. She wants to stay where she's at. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's a very good point of when we say we're building these state-of-the-art, low-income housing opportunities. It's just a play on words in a way because it's still valued and taxed at a rate. Right. It's still valued and taxed at a rate, and then also you got to look at what the government is spending to run that. Right. Because it's not free. Right, because obviously it's not free. Yeah. Obviously I'm getting out of my privy here as an assessor, but there's no question that when a government runs housing, they run it for 10 times as expenses as a private landlord does. Right. So we should be trying to keep people in their homes instead of saying, oh, let's move to a place that's the government's going to spend way too much money on doing. So let's, like the Seattle housing, the Snohomish County housing, all these housing programs are good. They help pay rent. Right. They don't put it on the government's hands and then the government runs it poorly or not. Right. Well, and it's also by investing back into businesses, local businesses versus it's a win for everybody in that direction. Whereas if you spending $7,000 a month to house somebody, it's a loss for everyone because people are paying taxes to do that. Right. Whereas instead, you could take that $7,000 and you could help 10 people with that same amount of money by just saying 10 people, we're going to give them $700 a month to help them with rent because they meet those qualifications. Yeah. Yeah. I have several tenants that could use that right now. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. I think you explained that very well and lots of wheels turning. Well, great. Any final things? I feel like I just have so much more knowledge right now. So. I think that's it. Just vote for Joe for Snohomish County Assessor. I love that. I think. Right. I really appreciate your time and willingness to come out and chat. And I appreciate you doing this, helping getting the word out, and hopefully people listen to this stuff and know more about it. Yeah, and vote, right? Yeah, and vote. So, cool. Well, it was great to meet you. Yeah, nice to meet